Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, today, I want to talk about a very important subject besides just the ongoing coverage, and that is misinformation. Now, Western media here in the United States can no longer be counted on for really any truthful news whatsoever. None. Zero. They have gone off the cliff in terms of lies and dishonesty and being untruthful. Very few people here in the United States, the dis-United States, the un-United States, trust the media. And when I say the media, I'm referencing CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC, Reuters, Newsweek, what have you. Now, what I want to discuss is essentially more lies. And quite often, here in the media in the U.S., in terms of casualty figures, they quote directly from Ukrainian sources, from the official state Ukrainian calculations of reported Russian casualties. Now, these casualties are just off the chart. And they are false. They are incorrect casualty figures. And I think part of the reason that the Ukrainians are declaring these casualties, that they've killed or wounded or destroyed X amount of Russian equipment, because they're losing and there's not a lot that they can talk about. The Russians are continuing to advance. Now, again, it's a war of attrition. It is designed to eventually break the Ukrainian army. Now, what I want to have a look at is these latest Ukrainian figures. I want to address these figures, and I think it's worth just, if you're following this conflict, and let's say hypothetically you are an uninformed urbanite, and I have interacted with many uninformed urbanites here in the United States who take what the media is saying as the gospel, as truth. And it's not. It is completely false. So here are the current casualty figures as of February 24, 2022. The Ukrainian military claims to have killed, wounded, or captured approximately 512,420 Russian troops. Now that exceeds the size of the Russian army, the ground forces, just the ground forces, at the start of the conflict. An impossible number. Absolutely impossible number. Look, if the Russian casualty figures are 512,000, then Ukrainian casualty figures would be in excess of probably 1 million. Because remember, the Ukrainians don't have an air force. The Russian air force is many times bigger. And look, even the Ukrainians in Western news outlet reports that Russian artillery has a 10-to-1 advantage over the Ukrainian army. So that means the Ukrainians are acknowledging that besides having a very large air force with hundreds of aircraft, launching thousands of glide bombs per month, it also has a much larger advantage in artillery. Now, let's look at the equipment. The Ukrainians claim that they have destroyed 18,222 support vehicles. They claim they have destroyed 15,020 infantry fighting vehicles. Now let's go and have a look at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, and let's look at the declared amount of armored infantry fighting vehicles that was in Russian inventory close to the start of the conflict. 4,900 infantry fighting vehicles is what the Russians had at the start of the conflict that could be called active service vehicles. And the Ukrainians, again, are saying that they destroyed 15,020. Now, here's another kicker. The Ukrainians claim that they have destroyed 13,345 artillery pieces. At the start of the conflict, the Russians had, per this report, 4,316 pieces of tubed artillery. That includes towed and self-propelled. Now let's say hypothetically they're also counting multiple launch rocket systems. At the start of the conflict, the Russians had essentially about 850 of those systems. Plus or minus, maybe more, maybe less. And again, at the start of the conflict, 4,316 pieces of artillery for the Russians, and the Ukrainians are claiming to have destroyed 13,345. Do we have an accountant present? I mean, do we really need an accountant present? What is not adding up with this figure? All right, now let's look at main battle tanks. The Ukrainians claim to have destroyed, are you ready? 7,794 main battle tanks. The Ukrainians have claimed to destroy over 7,000 Russian main battle tanks. At the start of the conflict, the Russians had under 3,000 main battle tanks in active service. Now, yes, they do have reserve main battle tanks. They have tanks that are in storage, and obviously they have tanks that they can produce as well. But even the Ukrainian intelligence service has declared that the Russians don't have the ability to produce said tanks or refurbish said tanks at the rate that would computate a loss of 7,794 main battle tanks. Makes zero sense. Oh, and I apologize. So, in actuality, in terms of artillery, the 13,345 was just tubed artillery. The Ukrainians claim to have destroyed 1,092 multiple launch rocket systems. 1,092 multiple launch rocket systems. Now, that's what the Russians had at the start of the conflict. Now, at the same time, the Ukrainians are saying the Russians have on the front line anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 main battle tanks right now that are active. So you do the math. They've destroyed upwards to 8,000, or they claim to have destroyed 8,000, plus another 3,000. It's over 10,000 main battle. I mean, do you see where the fallacy is in these numbers? And the problem is the media here in the West, they just go along with these figures. Now, sometimes they'll say per a Ukrainian report, but I would say more times, more often than not, they simply state that Ukrainian figure as if it is fact, and they have no journalistic integrity. There's no journalists from these major quote unquote mainstream media outlets that are even close to the front line. Journalism in terms of combat journalism by the mainstream media is gone. It doesn't really exist. It's history. So the journalists here in the West, they simply go by what the state tells you. There's a release of information. There's no investigative journalism anymore. It's gone. It is simply propaganda that you must believe. And the problem is there's channels like this that are reporting the truth. The truth. So those casualty figures, compounding with what the Ukrainians report the Russians have along the front line right now, are just off the chart false reports. Now, as of today, the Russians and the North Koreans, let's go over to North Korea. There are a few uninformed urbanites, such as Kamala Harris, the vice president, the alleged vice president of the disunited states, of the ununited states. I do believe she was able to identify between 4 and 8 countries. She knew the location of those countries. Outside of that, she couldn't tell you where any country is. And I believe she had no idea where North Korea was as well. So there's North Korea. North Korea is now in a military pact with the Russian Federation. Do you remember prior to the last president taking office? Do you remember what the unitary one-party state was declaring? Trump is going to get us into wars. There is going to be global war with the Trump presidency. No wars. Now, under the Joseph Biden administration, war. Not only war, the merging of allies, the continued alliance of a variety of very large nation states that now are looking to oppose the United States, the disunited states. So you now have Russia, you have North Korea, you have China, you have Iran, forming a cohesive military alliance. This military alliance will have millions and millions of troops. It will be the largest military alliance that the world has ever seen. Let me say that again. An alliance between North Korea, the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and Iran will create the largest military alliance ever seen in the history of mankind. Say thank you, unitary one-party state. Say thank you, Democrat Party. When they allege their political opponents are going to do something, that means that is what they are going to do. And they are ushering in the age of global war. That's where we're heading towards right now. Probably the largest conflict in the history of mankind. It will become bigger and more lethal than World War II. And that's where we're heading. And unlike World War II, where the United States was never really attacked, the continental United States and the people living in the continental United States during World War II really had no concern about being attacked. There was some minor concerns at the early stages of the conflict about the Japanese and the West Coast. And as the war continued, those fears went away. But in this conflict, the coming conflict that is on the way, with a Russian, Chinese, North Korean, Iranian, and that's just those countries right now, this alliance will get bigger. They will attack the continental United States. The continental United States will be struck. And it's coming. It is absolutely on the way. Whether it's a conflict that starts with the expansion of the Ukrainian-Russian war, or the conflict spreads to a engagement between South Korea and North Korea, or China and Taiwan, all these conflicts are going to merge eventually. You will have the continued Russian-Ukrainian war, possibly bringing in Western European powers. You will eventually see a formal alliance between China and Russia along with North Korea. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point, as the war expands, we will see direct Chinese military support in terms of ground forces and air defense forces and air forces moving in to assist the North Koreans against an American and South Korean alliance. You will have the Chinese attacking Taiwan. You will see strikes against mainland Japan, the Japanese islands. And yeah, here in the United States, given the range of cruise missiles and drone systems and ballistic missile systems that are both open source and systems that are right now that are classified by both parties, yeah, you can expect the United States to be struck. And then the question is, will it become nuclear? Will this war expand into the nuclear realm? Look, we have never created weapon systems that we have not used. And yes, nuclear weapons have been used, obviously, during World War II. And if this conflict expands and exceeds the scope of World War II, nuclear weapons are going to be used again. Guaranteed. The United States has now, as this escalation continues, has now authorized the use of American weapon systems against targets deep inside the Russian Federation. F-16s are now on the way to Ukraine. Some of these F-16s will be based in Eastern Europe for operations against the Russians. Ladies and gentlemen, this is incredibly serious. And as I've talked about at the start of the program, the mainstream media is lying to you. The political party, the unitary one-party state that now controls the United States with a cabal of criminals, is leading the disunited states into both a civil war and a world war. It's on the way. And on a final note, the Ukraine now has a gender commissioner. Yes, the Ukraine has now accepted neoliberal policies and now has a transvestite and homosexual rights gender commissioner. They have bowed the knee to the neoliberal West, and now those policies will be instituted inside of the Ukraine. Food for thought. Well, Well, that does it for today. As always, thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.